Welcome back, Sebastian here, and today I'll be talking about Haas in the first half of their 2026 F1 season. First, I want to take a look at their qualifying performance through 11 races, and a bit like I predicted and very similar to the last time we had a big regulations reset, Haas starts the new set of regulations very well. First 3 or 4 races, they're towards the front of the midfield. But as teams started to bring upgrades, they started to fall further down the pack in 2022, and we're seeing the exact same picture play out this year in 2026. For Haas, they were pretty close to the front of the midfield, or at least comparative towards that front group, at races like Australia, China, even Japan, Miami as well, although maybe not quite as close with Alpine. And then ever since April, early May, other teams started to bring upgrades, and Haas has gradually fallen backwards through the order. So in terms of specifically looking at best points and worst points in terms of 3 race rolling average, their best point would have been around Miami, 4th race of the season, about 1.4 seconds off pole, almost identical to Audi, a team that they were very competitive with through those first 4 races. But as I talked about in my Audi video last time out, Haas has been on a very different trajectory from Audi. Audi have been pretty consistently about 1.3, 1.2 seconds off pole, which means they're generally matching development pace with the front-running teams, in this case Mercedes, as they have all but one of the pole positions for this year. And for Haas, they're kind of falling gradually further behind. Miami, again, 1.4 seconds off pole from that race and the 2 races prior. But when you look at where they are now, Belgium, worst point of the season, again, probably influenced by the fact that Belgium is generally the longest lap of the season, unless we have a wet race on one of the longer tracks. About 2.1 seconds off pole. So they've lost about 0.7 of a second compared to where they were in Miami. Not a very good rate of development, and that gap opened up very rapidly in almost 2 weekends, going from Miami up to Monaco, and then Monaco onwards. They've generally been about 2 seconds off pole. They have generally, though, been competitive with Williams. They were a little bit slower than Williams. Races here in Monaco, Barcelona, but have been generally quicker since then, but are, I think, at this point at risk of being passed by Aston Martin with their rejuvenated package. Of course, Aston not on this graph. I talked about them when I did my video looking at them. And for Haas, they're kind of in a bit of a position where they're in a bit of no man's land in the midfield, where they're pretty far from Williams and pretty far from Racing Bulls, Audi, and Alpine. Now, taking a look at their 2 drivers, I think it's been a pretty one-sided battle at Haas in both qualifying and race to head-to-head. So for qualifying performance, Behrman leads Ocon 8-3 with a median qualifying gap of about 0.2 of a second. Average starting position 14.45 for Behrman, 15.09 for Ocon, so only about half a position difference, which if you took this qualifying gap and you transplanted it on the 2025 grid, that would have been a much different gap in terms of starting position. So I guess Ocon's actually relatively lucky that his pretty big qualifying deficit is only translating into a half second or a half position deficit in starting position. But that being said, when you look at average finishing position, pretty bad story for Ocon here. Behrman is gaining more positions than even he is, despite the fact that he is starting lower. So for Behrman, average finishing position of 11.5, so he's gaining about 3 positions on his starting position on average, whereas for Ocon, 13.27. He is still gaining, but not nearly as much as Behrman is. Race head-to-head, a pretty ugly picture here, 7-1 in Behrman's favor, even worse ratio compared to qualifying, which is honestly a bit of a surprise, given what we saw last year, where Behrman, yes, won the qualifying head-to-head, but race head-to-head was much closer. But that being said, that probably suggests that Behrman's developing and improving more in race performance compared to qualifying performance in the second year in the series, which is what you would expect. Points battle is quite lopsided, 18-3, and at points in the season, I could kind of make an argument that, well, if Ocon had a couple 2 to 3 really poor races at the very beginning where Behrman was getting all his points, but when you look at the race head-to-head, which includes the later races where neither of the drivers are scoring points, the race head-to-head is so skewed that 18-3 is actually, I think, somewhat representative of the true disparity between the 2 drivers. Drivers' Championship rank 13th for Behrman and 17th for Ocon. Behrman, with the performance of the Haas not doing very well, I do think is at risk of falling a little bit further down the championship. Same with Ocon. I think Ocon will likely get passed by Hülkenberg sometime shortly after the summer break, assuming the two teams keep the trajectory that they're currently on. Now, looking at the two drivers individually, first taking a look at Behrman. For Behrman, I think he's had a very good season. He ranks in the top 10 for quality rating, race rating, and for points above expected this year, which in his second year in the sport is a very good position to be in. Quality rating, negative 0.212, ranks 10th, so a bit above average for qualifying performance. Race rating, positive 0.41, which ranks 6th, and again, above average performance there. Points above expected, positive 7.6, which translates to him scoring 181% of the points he was expected to, and again, that ranks 6th. So generally, very good performances from Behrman. We don't know where he's going to be on the 2027 F1 grid yet. I would say likely Haas, but you never know, another team might try to poach him away from the Ferrari umbrella, and we'll have to see if that comes to pass. Then when we look at Ocon, and the driver who I think for his time at Haas has been very consistently inconsistent. He's surprisingly very consistent in terms of rankings. Ranks 20th in quality rating, race rating, and points above expected on this year's grid, which unfortunately is not a very good spot to be. Quality rating, positive 0.387, well below average. Race rating, negative 0.68, well below average. And for points above expected, negative 5.5, 35%, also well below average. I don't think Ocon's been absolutely abysmal, but he's definitely been poor and definitely well below average. And I think at this point, he's probably more likely than not to lose his spot on the F1 grid. I think he'd be very, very lucky to keep an F1 seat, if not at Haas, at say somewhere else like Cadillac. If a seat were to open up there, I think he'd be very lucky to stay on the grid next year. I think for Haas, it's an unfortunate spot that they find themselves in. I think with the F1's recent trend of these massive regulation changes, very comprehensive changes coming in, we saw in 2022, 2026, that they simply don't have the manpower, the technical know-how to be able to develop early on at the same rate as the other teams. And I would even expect next year to be pretty poor, but once the gains start to become smaller and smaller, I would expect 2-3 years down the line, I would expect them to start catching up to the other midfield teams. And I think, unfortunately for Haas, they're looking at being in a position where they're going to be not very strong rest of this season and possibly for parts of next season, kind of mirroring what we saw the last regulation cycle where 2023 was very bad. They finished 10th in the championship, but 2024, 2025 were much more competitive. So that's all for my look at Haas at the midpoint of the 2026 F1 season. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.